I am Burcu Serdar Köknar, an academic, an architect from MEF University and anonim.istanbul design company. I think and work on landscape and architecture simultaneously. And I'm recording this podcast for the Housing, Education, Research and Advisory Center, HERA-C, of Faculty of Architecture and Urban Research Development Center of Eastern Mediterranean University. I will be talking with the title of How to Touch the Earth. When I was invited by the center to make a talk on the podcast series entitled Storyboarding the Home and the City about urban cooperatives, or maybe about urban farming, I got excited, and my thoughts drifted from food and water to soil. I thought about how we are attached to our planet and how we root ourselves to the earth. The day I got the invitation, I was one of the first days of the quarantine days. My thoughts were already on food and production and the connections beyond. And then, not spending much time on deciding the name of the podcast, I thought to call it as How to Touch the Earth. After that, I remembered an article by Bertrand Russell. The name of the article is How to Grow Old. I was about 15 years old when I read it first for our literature course at the high school. I remember that I was impressed with the content and the flow of the article. Having all these traces of taste, I went back and read again. It starts with the words, "In spite of the title, this article will really be on how not to grow old, which at my time of life is a much more important subject." As you may understand from the very first sentences, the article is about going through life, having new years and ages. I felt that there is something in this article which is connected to what I would like to say in this talk, but I didn't know what exactly it is. These days are different than the days of the summer last year. We all have, as individuals or communities, had to start to see with a new perspective, with the beginning of new coronavirus pandemic, or even we may call that a crash in our lives. That moment brought us to a situation of thinking about our basics in life, and maybe we have felt the earth as a whole for once. One thing that I feel deeply nowadays, that we lose our direct attachment to the planet and our collective lives, which are bound together with invisible ties. In Istanbul, the quarantine started in mid-March. The days passing at home had a start, and I think we all were surprised and tried to understand what was going on. Although it is just 3 months before today, I feel it's way too long ago. We started looking out from our own lives and our homes with a feeling of loneliness, or maybe this was what I felt myself. One way was to look outside physically from the window, and the other was from our mobile phones, from social media. I started to discover that neighbors around our apartment were looking more outside like me. We were even sharing our feelings just by looking outside to the vacant streets. Sometime later, around 3 weeks or a month, I figured out that there was something different on the facades of the apartments. There seemed to be more plants in the balconies and on the windows. From one day to another, the amount of the pots and the plants were increasing. There was something that people were looking for, a peace that makes you feel or remember that you are a part of nature. On the other hand, looking from social media, I could see that people around me were trying to share productions mainly from the kitchen. The kitchen became the epicenter of production of one, and the production stories became more visible. Many people started to make bread. I was one of them too. Firstly, I have found out that there was a shortage of instant yeast at the supermarkets. And then there were intense discussions started on how to make a sourdough starter. The amount of flour, water, shaping the loaf, the temperature of the oven, and so on were the favorite topics. Then the discussions went on to find the right flour, the type of the wheat. After that stage, with the storage of flour, the topic became to find the right producers to reach. The food and the making of it were on the focus. The basics of the existential needs of the human are being discovered by us experiencing these difficult days. There was a collective happening. Everybody was trying to achieve the same thing and sharing the experiences and trying to help each other in the process. There were articles in magazines. I want to read you an excerpt from the Guardian here. From the date of 19th of April 2020, written by Catherine Gammon, titled Life in the Time of Corona, Baking. She tells a story about a teacher and continues. He says it's helped him feel productive and deal with stress. It was a good exercise in mindfulness and a distraction from thinking about the world. So in those days, I certainly eased some anxiety, he says. Baking your way through anxiety or uncertainty is nothing new. In fact, anxiety has been on the rise since 2016, according to the American Psychiatric Association, and baking has climbed with it. But with the pandemic confining millions to their homes, the practice is rising faster than a packet of quick-acting yeast. Rolling, kneading, and mixing all have a calming quality, forcing you to be in the moment and not stuck mentally in the future or past. There was a feeling of growing alive organisms. You have to be careful with the flavor of growth. You have to align yourself with that. We could find a proper time to grow and to act with the pace of that growth. As the people living in a city, we started to think about food production in a real mode, how food is brought to cities, if it's safe or not. With this, I couldn't help myself to think about how it would be if growing food were part of our daily lives, how the city culture would be like, and how the cities would be looking like then. Too many designers engaging with landscape and city discuss how urban farming is possible. Charles Waldheim, in the magazine Places, writes about the agrarian city in his article, Notes Toward a History of Agrarian Urbanism. He makes an introduction. I would like to read his paragraph here. The categories of agrarian and urban are usually understood as distinct. Across many disciplines, and for centuries, the country and city have been defined in opposition to one another. But today, in striking contrast, design culture and discourse abound with claims for the potential for urban agriculture. As environmental literacy among designers and scholars has grown, so too has enthusiasm for agricultural production in and around cities. Fueling this trend is rising public interest in food and its production and distribution in a globalized world. Waldheim tells about agrarianism and argues that it offered a counterpoint to the increasingly dense metropolises that grew with the great migrations from farm villages to industrial cities in the 19th and early 20th centuries. In his article, he reads 3 unbuilt projects. Frank Lloyd Wright's Broadacre City, 1934-35, Ludwig Hilberseimer's New Regional Pattern, 1945-49, and Andrea Brandt's Agronica, 1993-94, and its further development, Territory for the New Economy, 1999. These three projects are mentioned here as proposed a profound reconceptualization of the city, a radical decentralization, and the solution of the urban figure into a productive landscape. While Time concludes with the words, Wright, Hilberseimer, and Brandt's each pursued agricultural urbanism as part of critical positions that engaged economic inequality, social justice, and environmental health. Each has contributed an important legacy for today's agrarian urbanists. City as a productive landscape with farms and fields. Taking these projects as references, we would imagine the city form, shapes, and structures, and the moments that would create for the ones living. The city would be a responsive, productive whole. Would people of the city be working collectively, living with the pace of the living environment? It is not possible to wonder about this living environment without its created commons, networks, and its economy. All these themes are related to a new perception and maybe a new value of aesthetics. If we come back to our existing cities and think about the possibilities of a layer of collective production and agriculture, many projects are taking place seeking these possibilities and potentials. Not just seeing this issue as a greenwashing story, but maybe seeing it as a research of food providing strategies, which has become more visible in importance with the pandemic, with the critical position of inequalities, social justice, and health. Thinking that these supplies wouldn't be enough to feed the cities, the act of production would make us a strong community, bring us a reflex of cooperation, and making a resilient chain of information and maybe reaching more fair trade and healthy supplies. And also, with collective production attached to our daily lives, we would meet with the aspects of the process of growing food, the pace of this as well as having the knowledge of the soil. This process of production makes people question the consumption. Here, I would like to tell you about an interview on Prinzessinnengarten, an urban garden that was started in Kreuzberg, Berlin in 2009 by Nomadisch Grün, a non-profit company. An interview, Promises of Urban Agriculture in 2012. One of the founders of the garden, Marco Clausen, says that they call it a social and ecological urban farm. And he says that they call it kind of social business as they do not get any funding from the city. He says what drives the project is not the desire of the countryside, but a desire for the urban life of people coming together, doing together, negotiating, living together, and creating space. The garden itself can be the instrument to produce this form of urban life, an urban life that makes possible completely unforeseen connections between different people. He tells about a garden not on the outskirts of the city, but in the center of the city with people creating space, people participating in decision-making of creating their own environment. Formulate a different understanding of what the city can be in the future and what is needed. And he continues, the city could be ready for a crisis by giving people space for them to find their own solutions. People learn how to cooperate. With spaces like this, where there may be a paradigm shift towards people being engaged and the city finding new forms of cooperation with people. He says that this can be a platform for making people aware of what is going on in the city. He argues if the qualities of the cities which are specific, like in Berlin, are going to be preserved, New frameworks should be found, and these should be integrated into city planning. Clausen talks about the experience of being a producer, understanding how food is produced, thinks that these gardens can mobilize the imagination of people of different lifestyles and cities. He concludes with the words, having a specific attitude, people taking care of something living, and people care of something fragile. Gardening may be transferred to city planning, like growing. It needs time, nourishment, protection to get bigger. We have these spaces for cultural pollination. This is the potential. A city, whether it has been planned agrarian in the beginning or with small pieces of production injected in later, makes us think a productive landscape that responds and grows in a manner of flexibility, emancipation, and inclusiveness. And most importantly, it becomes fragile to be cared for and protected. This is also, I think, how we have to touch the earth. Going back to the article by Russell, I would like to finish this talk with the last words of him. I think there is a very slight yet important connection with how not to touch the earth. The best way to overcome it, the fear of death, so at least it seems to me, is to make your interests gradually wider and more impersonal until bit by bit the walls of the ego recede and your life becomes increasingly merged in universal life. An individual human existence should be like a river, small at first, narrowly contained within its banks and rushing passionately past rocks and over waterfalls. Gradually, the river grows wider, the banks recede, the waters flow more quietly, in the end, without any visible break, they become merged in the sea and painlessly lose their individual being. The man who, in old age, can see his life in this way will not suffer from the fear of death, since the things he cares for will continue. And if, with the decay of vitality, weariness increases, the thought of rest will not be unwelcome. I should wish to die while still at work, knowing that others will carry on what I can no longer do, and content in the thought that what was possible has been done.